I will bid you Assalamu alaikum, because that is what my faith teaches me. And that, regardless of who is in the pulpit, is what the book teaches. When we consider the question of whether Islam is dominated by radicals, we have to look in terms of absolute numbers and in terms of prominence and in terms of symbols. Saying that Islam is dominated by radicals is much like saying, is as absurd as saying that America is dominated by murderers. Certainly, they exist within our society. And certainly, radicals exist within the fold of Islam. But do they dominate? Absolutely not. Based on the polling data that Reza shared with you, and based on so much other data that exists out there, the people on the Muslim streets, both in the West and in the quote-unquote Muslim world, are striving for freedom of speech, for democracy, for technology, for those very things that they admire the West for. That is what their faith is pushing them to do. Now, Islam is dominated, if you will, by scholars, by average people more so than anyone else, who are struggling to understand Islam in a 21st century context and who seek to foster inclusion of Muslims on the international stage, and who want nothing more than to be understood and to be respected, as that same poll showed over and over again. To point to Saudi Arabia over and over again, I will hand that to the other side. Saudi Arabia is by no means the shining glory of any part of the Muslim world. But pointing to pockets in no way reflects the overall picture, the overall reality. Looking in a pocket or in many pockets in no way represents the overall costume, the overall character of the people. And it is the people who define the faith and who define their global community. The reality is that the moral, when we look at where this radical threat lies, I travel across this country and around the world. We can fight anecdotes with anecdotes. When I was in Malaysia a few years ago, talking to youth on the streets there, their single goal was to be understood. They wondered why Americans didn't understand them and why Americans thought that they were all terrorists. When I traveled to Egypt, it was the same. When I traveled even to Bosnia, to the former Yugoslavia where my parents are from, it was very much the same. The lack of understanding on both sides of the issue has in many ways been fueled by media perceptions, as we have described here earlier. The reality on the ground is this: radicals are failing in their attempt to dominate. Radicals, those who make up Al-Qaeda and its various branches, are on the run. They are in decline. Their messages are not reaching the audiences that they seek to convert and to brainwash as much as they used to. And that, to me, is an important symbol of the rise of moderation, the rise of the middle, the rise of those who dominate this faith. Even those in Al-Qaeda, Ayman Zawahiri, who recently released a tape, they have had to change their tactics because they are receiving criticism from within the Muslim community. They have had to respond to criticism about targeting civilians and have had to answer these questions to the very people that they are trying to recruit. And if we look even at the reality in the quote-unquote, and I say again, quote-unquote Muslim world, look even to Pakistan, where we saw that the radicals indeed killed Bhutto. But what did the people do in response? They elected a secular government. They responded in a different way. The people on the ground are the ones who are defining the face and the nature and the character of the faith and of the global Muslim community. And again, what do they want? That's what we have to remember. They do not want death and destruction. They want hope, they want economic ability, they want education, and they want a seat at the table. If we also look to where the war against radicals is taking place, it's almost entirely in the Islamic world, between mainstream societies and governments on the one hand, and radical minorities on the other hand. Just look at what Muslim scholars and Muslim leaders have been able to achieve in the last few years, and then we'll ask ourselves, why haven't we heard about it? In 2005, Jordan's King Abdullah convened an international Islamic conference of 200 of the world's most leading Islamic scholars from 50 different countries. Those scholars unanimously issued a ruling on 3 fundamental issues: the validity of all interpretations of Islam, the 8 legal schools. They forbade the declaration of apostasy between Muslims, and they further provided preconditions to issuing fatwas, since they have become such a currency on the international market and have lost their meaning entirely. That's one example. Another is that 138 Muslim scholars joined together to affirm freedom of expression. Scholars from around the world, and to condemn the negative reactions to the Danish cartoons, and which resulted, I think, interestingly, in the fact that there was very little reaction to the most recent Danish episode, if you will, of this film Fitna. And those same scholars reached out to the Pope to establish a historic Muslim Catholic forum, seeking opportunities for dialogue that they could do on an international scale at the level of leadership, and that could also be modeled for their citizens in their countries and for the faithful among them who wanted to see something different take place. Internationally recognized leaders are calling for integration, for tolerance, and for advancement. And their reach is 10 times wider, at least, than that of Al-Qaeda or any of their associates. Just consider those, even in Turkey, which has recently elected a new government, but has taken the lead in ushering in a historic re-examining of Islamic material to cater to the contemporary world. That is just one among countless examples of people who are working day in, day out to re-emerge as the dominant force within their faith, and who are crying out for attention on the world stage. Just consider this last example, which is that...
I'm sorry, we'll have to hear the last example later. Thank you very much.
Where do the cameras turn? That's the question.
Edina Lekovic.